When it comes to the way Blitz's previous title tackled the homophobia aspect, they do it in a very unique way. In the Camp Buddy games, we see how homophobia is not only not a thing, but the characters also don't process sexuality in the same way we do. The only characters that mention sexuality are Yuri and Jim when they are freaking out, and that is played up for comedic effect. It's unusual such approach for a realistic story that focuses on a queer relationship, since they usually have the characters reason on their sexualities or the consequences of them at least a bit. However, for Jock Studio, it's clear they want to do things in a different manner. In Ace's room, we can immediately see posters of the Camp Buddy games, and one of the questions in the survey, which may I remind you is canonically weird and written by the socially inept Avan, is about those It visual novels. So the previous model does not apply anymore, and let's not beat around the bush. Sexualities are a thing in this game world, it's pretty clear. This might lead one to believe the Jock Studio takes place in our homophobic world, but I actually don't think that is the case, for a series of reasons I'm about to explain. For simplicity's sake, let's start by assuming the Jock Studio does take place in our world, in what we can assume is a current day North America city. I will then go point by point explaining why, after disassembling every line of dialogue in the game, it doesn't make that much sense anymore that the game takes place in real life. Let's start from when Ace is heading to class and he stops to talk to himself about how he doesn't fit in the kind of college Olympus U is. He mentions a lot of things, but oddly enough, the fact that he's gay is not among them. You'd think that admittedly a somewhat insecure gay guy like him would feel at least a bit unwelcomed in the hyper-masculine environment of professional sports. I'm pretty sure that if he grew up in our society, he would know that a sports university is not exactly a place tailored to him, even if he never experienced direct discrimination on campus. Which is very unlikely to have happened, since we know that prior to the demo he almost never left his room. This in itself doesn't say much, since everybody experiences their sexuality differently, so Ace could have many reasons not to think about this. Which leads me to the next weird thought he has. When Ace is waiting for Leo to change, he says to himself while talking about how easy Leo is to get along with, being two guys at all, sometimes I get flustered and it's hard to have this kind of interactions, but with him it just came so naturally. This line is not just about Ace's time at Olympus U, but it's probably about his entire life experience. What is weird about it is that it seems like the biggest problem Ace has is that when he gets flustered in front of a guy, he has a hard time speaking normally. We know that he does get evidently flustered in these kind of scenarios, like when he meets Avan and Bryce, but you think that if this was real life, the biggest problem he would encounter would be the guy on the other side possibly having an adverse reaction to the realization that the Ace is into him. In this worst case scenario, the best worst case scenario would be the guy shutting Ace off by leaving or disengaging with the conversation. The worst case scenario would be the guy insulting Ace not so lightly. Even if this worst case scenario happened to Ace even only a couple of times in his life, you'd think that it would be enough not to give himself all the blame if a social interaction is unsuccessful. You'd also think that if Ace ever experienced something like this, which would be likely in real life, his self-preservation mechanism would kick in once he starts to get flustered, and would at least try not to show it until he knows that the person in front of him will not be adverse to the situation. Instead, we are in Ace's head the entire time when he meets Avan and Bryce, yet he never tries to hide the way he feels, which he shouldn't do in the first place, but that is just how real life works, sadly. Luckily, it seems like Ace doesn't have to hide the way he feels. If we take a look at a seemingly insignificant line of dialogue, we can gather an important insight in how this world seems to work. Huh? Why is the new guy going to the lockers with Zane? Fangirl 2 when Zane and Ace go into the lockers. Not fair! Boys get all the luck. Fangirl 4 when Zane and Ace go to the lockers. Considering that Ace, a filthy boy if you get what I mean, as not a raider man, it's kinda weird that is all they said. We know that there were at least 6 girls around Zane after the match, but probably a lot more, because Ace says he couldn't reach Zane while he was surrounded. So, isn't it a bit weird how none of the girls insulted Ace for clearly being a man who is into the exact same man they are into? Considering that they saw him smell the towel, it was pretty clear the way which Ace swings. From the way the scene is framed, it also seems like Zane and Ace were out of earshot, so if this was a homophobic world, wouldn't at least one of the girls among them call Ace the F-word or something? It just seems kinda weird to me that none of them said something even slightly offensive towards Ace out of jealousy. More so, since the only thing they said about him was highlighting the objectively true fact that guys who like guys can follow their crush into the lockers while straight girls can't, which is just true and not offensive no matter how you spin it. Speaking of people not being homophobic when they normally would be, don't you ever think that Bryce is a bit too nice for who he's supposed to be? May I remind you what he tells Ace when he understands that he's into him?
Hate to break it to you, but I ain't into dudes. Now get out of here before I beat your ass!
If he is / pretends to be as homophobic as one might initially believe, why didn't he tell Ace, "Get the away from me, you or something similar? Instead, he's abrasive but relatively civil in telling Ace that he isn't into him. There were also other people nearby, so if Bryce made a scene, he could have gained macho points for bullying the local homosexual. Even after he goes to the club, if you read it carefully, you can see that he seems to only be worried about Ace exposing the fact he does porn. Period. Not gay porn, just porn. When they are talking outside the club, Bryce says,
Gotta admit, though, it's pretty crazy you don't care who knows about the club. No way I'll ever be as careless as you.
To which Ace says,
Well, it's not like there are a lot of people I know to begin with. And I don't think anyone would care even if they found out. As depressing as that sounds.
Notice so they are always talking about the club. Sexualities are never mentioned. On top of that, Bryce seems to be pretty okay with gay men, despite that his archetypes gives him many reasons not to. He does find Jocks and Ace to be annoying, but that seems to be it. By the end, he's also more than fine with Ace calling him hot. On that note, isn't it pretty strange how Ace never thinks for a moment that Bryce could not be straight? Considering how much he thirsts after him, you'd think that he'd visually think at least once or twice, maybe he'll find out that he actually likes men if he stays in the club. Wouldn't that be a dream come true? It seems like a pretty natural reaction for someone thirsting after a person that doesn't swing their way, yet Ace never thinks of something along those lines. Which would make sense if he grew up in a homophobia-less world, because this will mean there will be no barrier stopping most people from understanding their sexualities early in life. Bryce is 21, which in our world is a quote-unquote reasonable age to quote-unquote reconsider, but in a homophobia-less universe, not having things figured out by that age or lying to others and or to themselves about one's own sexuality would definitely make Bryce the odd one out. Regardless if Bryce is lying about not liking men or doesn't actually know it yet, in a homophobia-less world it would still be a rare occurrence. I think this explains pretty well why Ace never thinks about a scenario in which Bryce could be into him. He just has no reason to doubt Bryce's straightness. If you're wondering why is then Bryce stating that he's straight, we don't know yet, but I suspect it might be for reasons that are tailored specifically to him. Before ending Bryce's section, which ended up being the beefiest, pun intended, I wanna address one last thing. When Bryce dresses back up after filming, he says to Ace, "There, if I don't cover up, you'll keep staring at my cock, homo." I will admit that it can be read as discriminatory. However, with the context I've illustrated so far and that I'll illustrate after, I think it comes as less damaging of an insult than in our world. It's like making fun of someone for being short in real life. It's still not nice to insult someone about something they can change about themselves, but it's also not a hate crime, if that makes any sense. I really hope I got my point across. Tying into Bryce not wanting to be exposed as a part of the club, we find my last point in support of this theory. None of the jocks seem to worry about the long-term consequences about joining a gay porn club. It seems like they're just joining a porn club, not a gay one. Let him explain. Let's take Avan and Zane's cases. They are both in an elevated position at Olympus U, and being exposed as having done porn could cause them many problems. However, in a homophobic world, if it came out that they did gay porn, the problems could be a lot more. Starting with Avan, we know that he is not very well liked in the school. We can gather that from several quotes in his route, such as, "Well, no, but I've heard rumors about him." The rest of the team is in the outdoor pool. Huh? If the rest of the team is outside, why are you in here? So the rumors about the student council president being standoffish and very straightforward were true, huh? At least at the start.
People are already skeptical of a sophomore being the president, so I do everything I can to ease those concerns.
If he tries his best to raise those concerns, in a homophobic world, wouldn't he also want to keep his sexuality under wraps so that he wouldn't have to deal with the potential problems that might arise from that? Instead, he trusts Ace with the knowledge of his sexuality without any kind of warning or recommendation, which would be unusual for someone as meticulous and careful as Avan. This would make sense if the problem was only the porn part. If Ace would expose that, he'd go down with the ship too. Not only that, but a rumor about the president of the student council making porn on campus, it's not the first thing I believe without any evidence. A rumor about Avan being two men, however, would be much more believable, and it could be an easy way for people who already don't like Avan to ingrain their distrust further. Would Avan really leave a person he met less than half a day prior with this potential bombshell that could cause him so many problems? Even if he doesn't have any reason to distrust Ace, Avan is probably the better safe than sorry kinda guy. As far as he knows, Ace could very well be a hitman or a drug dealer. Who tells him Ace doesn't have ulterior motives to expose him? If homophobia is a thing, I'd expect Avan to at least warn Ace to keep the way the student council president swings for himself. If it came out, I don't think it would be enough to get Avan ousted as president, but it's definitely something he would want to keep full control over. Yet, in actuality, Avan does warn Ace to keep his mouth shut, but it's once again only in the context of the club.
Not really. I have all that under control. Unless you or Jock leaks what we're doing, it'll just appear as a harmless club.
It's also worth noting how he says only what we are doing. There aren't any reference to who they are doing. So it really seems like the potential problem is only the porn. As for Zane, many of the things I said about Avan still apply here, with the difference that for Zane things could be much more disastrous on top of that. If Avan didn't have any concrete reasons not to trust Ace besides the fact that they just met, Zane does have a real reason to think Ace could cause him some damages. For starters, Zane is much more popular than Avan. Hard to say how much exactly, since we don't know how popular he is on social media, but at least on a city level he seems to be a celebrity. Keep in mind that the city where Olympus U is situated doesn't seem to be that small, both from what we can see at the basketball court during the game, and in general, I'd expect such a prestigious school to be in an above-average sized city. It also seems that out of all of the guys, Zane seems like the one who has the greatest incentive to continue his sports career. He's not just a pro player at his game, but his popularity grants him a lot of fans. The rest of the jocks might be good at their respective sport, but they for sure don't have fan clubs. Signing a contract with a new player that is not only good at the game, but also a fan magnet, is an opportunity I think most sports teams will not pass up. I'm pretty sure Zane himself knows that he has a much better shot at superstardom than most others at the school. Plus, he definitely likes money, and becoming a basketball player would probably make him earn a lot more than with whatever job he could find using his chemistry degree. This is definitely great for him, however, since he's already on the highest podium possible, falling off would also hurt him 10 times more. As much as I'm sure many of his fangirls would find him even hotter if they knew he slept with guys, with only some finding to be a turn-off, the middle-aged straight white men that run things like the sports industry in a homophobic world would probably not be as pleased. It's kinda like a Kit Connor situation. Before he was forced to come out, he was being screened to possibly have some very important roles in Hollywood, but after the forced coming out, his chances of hanging out with the biggest dogs in the industry probably and sadly faded away. It would probably be very similar for Zane if he's exposed as into guys before he has a chance to truly prove himself as a star in the basketball world. In this case, he would probably never be able to reach the very top. I really don't see how Zane could not know about this, which makes his choice to join Jock Studio rather baffling. Especially since I doubt people will be searching up pornographic images specifically of the rest of the jocks, minus Derek. But Zane already has many people who will search him up for that kind of stuff, and he knows that. His chances of getting exposed are already so high that even if he decided to take the risk, I can see why in the world he wouldn't at least warn Ace in any way not to go tell people about it. May I remind you that everything that Zane knows about Ace is that he is a porn-addicted guy who never in his life touched a dick that wasn't his own, let alone some grass. I can't see Zane ever being foolish enough not only to gamble his future career by joining a gay porn club, but also leaving someone like Ace running around with that kind of information when he could, as far as Zane knows, abuse it for his own personal gain. Even if Zane is reckless enough to join Jock Studio, the fact that he doesn't in any way try to make sure Ace keep his mouth shut would make him someone that is just straight up stupid. I'd expect at least a warnings on the lines of, hey Ace, let's keep this thing between us, okay? If you'll do, I might reward you. It's not an assurance that Ace won't cause him problems, but it's better than nothing. If Zane was doing straight porn instead, the problems that could stunt his career would be a lot less, and it might even play in his favor. However, all of these issues with the gay porn would disappear in the moment we take into consideration the homophobia scenario. In a world where there isn't any kind of stigma against queer people, then it wouldn't really matter from the start the kind of porn Zane did, because the results would always be the same. Zane is not gambling his career by joining Jock Studio, because even if people knew that he's into men, it wouldn't really change anything. So the Ace problem doesn't pose itself either. And even if his fangirls did find out about the porn, since it's just porn, it would most likely become some sort of open secret in his fan club, and anyone outside of it would most likely not end up knowing the full extent of it. As for the rest of the jokes, I've already talked about how Bryce seems to worry only about others considering him a loser for the porn, period, while for Derek it's a bit too late to worry about people finding out. This leaves us with Leo and Yuto, who once again don't seem particularly worried about other people finding out about their sexuality. Considering that their masters are in computer science and physics respectively, even in a homophobic world, them being out wouldn't really jeopardize their future careers. Yuto even goes as far as to immediately admit to Ace that he likes guys by stating that he's also a perv in the context of the boys' locker rooms, making it pretty darn clear that he is not straight. I think this homophobia-less world is a suiting explanation to why Ace doesn't feel like he has to hide the way he feels when he meets a hot guy, why homophobic behaviors are not expressed by anyone when they could very well have been, and why none of the guys seem to worry about how having gay sex on camera could end up hurting them in any way if it comes out. This kind of approach to homophobia, a realistic world where society recognizes what we would deem queer as just a neutral difference of someone's identity, is something that I've personally only ever seen in fanfiction, usually to great success. I'd go as far as to say that in the final game, all of the guys, minus Bryce, but eventually him too by the end, would be considered out and proud by our standards. It's actually confirmed that Zane is out, since the official website says about him, rumored to be a playboy both on and off campus, with Olympus U being a mega sausage party. So in the games world, they'd be considered different from people identifying any other way for a simple matter of facts. This difference would thus not be a source of any stigmas or stereotypes. In short, no homophobia, or queerphobia to be broader. On a quick note, if you wonder how a homophobia-less world would affect the theory for which Jocks would try to blackmail the jocks with the films to work for him long term, it really wouldn't. Jocks could still use the porn to get the jocks into trouble with the school, or mess up their private lives, so he has no shortage of ways to blackmail them. I'm very interested if any of this rumble actually predicted anything right, in how Bliss will handle this aspect of the story. With that said, before concluding, we need to take both a step backwards and outside the fourth wall. Beyond any argument I can make while looking at what little the demo gives us to work on, said the one who wrote about 4,400 words on that little, I think there is one much simpler point that I can make to say that we will probably not see any homophobia in Jock Studio. Even if I'm not queer myself, from the research I've done to educate myself on this topic, I can tell that, yes, being queer sometimes sucks. I won't pretend to know exactly what that is like, because I just don't know, but what I do know for certain is that for many queer people, Camp Buddy was a safe place. A comfort game where they can see themselves represented in a lighthearted story that doesn't bring up the crap that comes along with being queer. Over the years, I've seen many people appreciate the game for this exact reason, and you can tell by playing it that that is what the Blitz team wanted for it. However, to do this, they sacrifice world building in a way that does make it a blunder in the game's otherwise enjoyable storytelling. In the Camp Buddy games, we are presented a world where the main form of romance we see, both directly and indirectly, is between men, and we can also gauge that the world at large seems to be made up of mostly gay men. which are not actually gay men, since sexualities are in tandem are not a thing in the Camp Buddy universe. We can see that both from stray quotes we can gather from all the roots, and the fact that in Scott Mercer's season, we see a 5-star, expensive as fuck, hotel with a gay bar inside that's full of people. This is not a bad idea for a fiction world, but the fact that the game never accommodates for this scenario is what makes it strange. You'd think that in that kind of world, being to BL would not be considered weird, yet it is. You'd think that there would be other ways in which people go about conceiving children when most men do not directly contribute to it, yet the baby-making process doesn't stray in any way from real life. You could say that is nitpicking, and you'd be mostly right, but when writing a story, details like this matter too, and even if this lack of cohesion is honestly not that big of a deal, it's still something that can be avoided with some forward planning. Which seems like something Blitz is inclined to do. With Jock Studio, we can see even from the demo how it seems like they are trying to make sure the game doesn't suffer from the same problems that were present in the Camp Buddy games. Like the problem with the characters' designs in the first game, or how the sex scenes felt disconnected from the main story. To solve the world building problem, going with the fully realistic world would betray Blitz's brand image and honestly also ruin the first take they have on the storytelling for BL stories. While the middle ground of sexualities existing without homophobia existing would still create that safe place for queer folks without having to compromise on the world building, or making it stray too far from real life. With that said, I think I've talked long enough. Yes, I'm inventing words now, but either way. But now I want to hear your take on this. Do you agree? Do you disagree? You gave up on this essay because it was too long, or because you couldn't understand a single thing I said because I either talk too fast, my accent is too thick, or I am just terrible at pronouncing things? Let me know down in the comments. I'm done. This took way longer than it should have had.